Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Kim Clark. I will tell you all about Professor Clark in just a moment. Grace Under Pressure is that show that deals with what's too often dismissed as the soft stuff, the caring, the commitment we exert toward others. When you do it from a leadership position, as you will definitely discover that Kim Clark is, you do it with the common cause of bringing people together. So welcome, Kim Clark.
Thank you, John. Good to be here.
I want to tell folks all about you, and I'll give them my little inside joke because I didn't really know how to address you because you are a professor, hold a PhD, you have been a dean, and you are a university president, and now you're back and teaching. But you said just call me Kim. So welcome, Kim Clark.
Thank you.
Okay. You were joined the Harvard faculty in 1978. You became dean at the Harvard Business School, and then you later left that to become the president of Brigham Young University-Idaho. You're the commissioner of education in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and you now are distinguished professor of management at Brigham Young University. Welcome.
Thank you.
Great. The reason you're here is not to recite a bunch of titles, but because you are the author, along with two of your children, a brand new book called Leading Through, Activating the Soul, the Heart, and the Mind of Leadership. And you bring your leadership experiences and that of your fellow authors to this. So you write in that in the last century, leadership was viewed as kind of a power over. In your book, there's a new contrasting paradigm called leading through. What is the difference between powering over, and leading through, Kim?
So the old legacy paradigm that's still with us, in that paradigm, it's really a paradigm of power. Power over means power over people, power over the organization. It's a system in which power is vested in a few people. Most of the people work in a kind of hierarchy in which there's direct supervision. Information flows up, power flows down, a lot of direct supervision, as I mentioned, a lot of bureaucracy, rules, standards, procedures, and the focus is on obtaining control through compliance to standards, rules, procedures, and so forth. Leading through is very different. Leading through is a paradigm that's rooted in the idea that leadership is the work of mobilizing people in a process of action, learning, and change to improve the long-term viability and vitality of the organization. But you have to do it in three ways for it to really be leadership. First, people in the organization have to experience increased personal growth, increased meaning and purpose in their lives. Second, the overarching purpose of the organization has to be realized more effectively. And lastly, productivity of all the resources have to be strengthened. So leadership is really about making that happen, and leading through uses a metaphor of soul, heart, and mind to help us capture the personal side of leadership. And then we also introduce this idea that leadership, the work of leadership is everyone's to do. And therefore, the organization has to be structured in such a way that people are empowered to take initiative and learn and act and change everywhere in the organization. So leadership permeates the organization.
Great. Now, what intrigued me about the book is the subtitle, because you say activating the soul, the heart, and the mind of leadership. Three dimensions of leadership. Tell me what soul means in this context, Professor Clark.
Sure. Soul is about the idea that leadership is always and everywhere a moral work. Leaders try to make things better, not just for your organization as an institution, but for the people in the organization. And therefore, because it's a moral work, leaders have a moral responsibility to act according to universal values that help strengthen and lift people. The soul of leadership, therefore, is all about what is inside of the leader and what kind of people the leaders are. And we develop some frameworks to help people understand how to obtain what we call virtue, which is the strength and power of moral excellence. So inspire
Right.
trust and so forth. And so that's really, in a nutshell, that's kind of what the soul of leadership's about.
The second element is heart. There's a lot of talk about heart in leadership.
Yeah.
How do you and your fellow authors define that?
So the heart of leadership is about helping people thrive. And we identify 4 different aspects of that process of helping people thrive. The first one is love. We don't often talk about love in organizations, but love is central to human thriving. People need to feel loved. The second one is inspiration. People need to be inspired to see beyond the mundane details of daily life and to see something bigger, more important, to see their own potential, to connect with other people. Third one is vitality, which really has to do with physical, mental, and emotional health. So people have the energy they need to do good work. And the last one is expression, which is a function both of voice, people having voice in the things that matter to them, and also the capacity to use their talents and abilities to do good work. And when those 4 elements are in place in an organization and leaders act on them, people thrive. That's the heart of leadership.
I'm glad you touched on the concept of love. Now, that's something that the legendary coach Vince Lombardi used to talk about, loving his players, and people would take it askance because he seemed to be so gruff. But of course, as you know from your work, our military focuses on love too. The unit cohesion base is based on that. So love is a real thing, and so why are we reluctant to talk about it in a leadership position?
John, I think for a lot of people, the reason is that the dominant paradigm is still with us so much. In that paradigm, leadership is about power. It's about exercising power over people. People become instruments. They're not there in and of themselves, but they're there to accomplish whatever the leader wants them to get done. They become like afterthoughts or cogs in the wheel. And this work that we've developed, people thrive only when they know the leader cares about them. And that people know you care about them and they trust you, amazing things happen. And that's what love does. People need not only to be loved, but they also need to love. And so you inspire in others the desire to care about your teammates, to care about the people you work with. And you create an environment in which people really do care. And that helps people thrive.
Now, in these 3 elements, we've discussed soul and heart, and the third is the mind.
Yeah.
How does mind play a role in this? Is it intellect, or how do you guys write about it,
So
Professor?
mind is the things we normally associate with things leaders do: make decisions, solve problems, marshal resources, allocate them, doing the things that require planning, organizing, strategizing, the things you normally associate with leadership. And those are super important. We don't want to get the impression or leave the impression that if you have soul and heart, you're done, because mind is the thing that actually is the work. And we want to do it with soul and heart, but the mind is where the work is. And what we developed there is the idea that there is such a thing as the leadership process. It's a process that is universal, can be applied in any setting, can be learned by anyone. And therefore, people can learn how to do the work of leadership, to exercise their God-given talents and abilities in their minds to make decisions, solve problems, take initiative, execute strategies, and so forth.
And toward that, I think that's the next thing, because you have something called operationalize the work of leadership, which is intriguing because the operation and work. So, which I think is the point you're driving through on this mind. Right? Do I understand you correctly?
Right. That's absolutely correct. So, we really believe that leadership is work. It's a certain kind of work. And in that work, the leadership process is crucial. And it has just 3 basic elements. Now, when you get into the details, there's a lot more to it, but it's very easy to understand. The work of leadership involves first what we call initiating. You have to initiate some action that you're going to take to mobilize other people to accomplish something good. That initiate phase is often overlooked by leaders. It's where you size up the opportunity, you assess it, but you also connect it to other people and other things going on in the organization, so you know where it fits, and you also identify possible team members, other people who can support and help. The second phase of that work is what we call mobilize. This is where you build a team. You figure out who the people are you want on the team, you bring them together, but you work together to chart direction, to identify how that team's going to work, where the boundaries are, how you make decisions as a group, what their individual people are responsible for, and so forth. That's mobilize. And that group also puts together a plan of how we're going to move forward to achieve this opportunity. And then you move into kind of the empower phase, where the role of the leader is to make sure that people have the resources they need, that they stay on track, that there's a whole effort made to give them and really to activate the power that's in them to go ahead and execute and work and do the work. So that process can be learned by anybody. It's universal. It's a powerful thing.
Okay. Now, you said something interesting that intrigued me, and among this initiate, mobilize, and empower, I would have thought you said that a hiccup that you have observed is initiate. My sense is that people are good at initiating and then things fall off. So what's the trouble with initiating?
So, people initiate things, but they don't go through the initiate process. So one of the reasons they fall off is they don't connect it. They don't understand. They don't figure out, how does what I'm interested in fit with what else is going on in the organization? Who are the people that are going to be influenced by what I do? How do they feel about it? Where are the people that are going to be, like my partners in making this happen? And when you don't do those things, it's very easy to, you go off on your own, but it's not connected. And that connection is powerful in an organization and really important. And a lot of people fail to do it.
That rings true. Now, you're going through the processes, and there's a modularity to it, but there's something that you write about, and it's the freedom within a system. How can there be freedom if do we lose our autonomy, or how does a leader ensure autonomy? So.
Yeah, it's a really important question, because historically, there's always been this battle. It's almost, we call it in the book, a tug of war between freedom of action on the one hand and unity of effort on the other. And in the legacy paradigm, most organizations choose unity. They want control, they want compliance, everybody work together at the cost of freedom of action. In this paradigm, we have found a way to set up the organization in such a way that people have both freedom of action within their sphere of responsibility, and their action fits in and interacts well with other people and with other things going on in the organization. And therefore, leaders, if they structure this thing, what we call the modular leadership system, they can achieve both. And it's extremely powerful. That principle, by the way, of modularity is everywhere in our world. And it's in our bodies, it's in technology, it's everywhere. It's in the clothes we wear. We see that applying to organizations, that you can create the connections that allow a team, for example, to operate independently within a framework that they understand and know and that works for them. And that's how they connect to the rest of the organization. So you can have both if you do it right.
Right. Now, we were talking about the unity within an organization, which is very important. But and then you talked about initially theories of leadership, or power through things, or power over. Okay, but there needs to be power and authority. So how do we keep it in check, or how do we utilize it to our best advantage?
So I think it's important to recognize that in this new paradigm, in leading through, we see power. And by the way, power is really important to leadership, as you noted. But here we see power through other people rather than over other people. The idea is you as a leader have on your team, let's say, or in your organization, you have people who have potential energy in them. They have potential energy. It's not yet kinetic energy, but you can activate that energy that's in them by the way you treat them, by the responsibility you give them, by the way you train them and organize them and empower them. Empower simply means that you activate the power that's in them. You don't exercise power over them, except in probably rare circumstances. So think of it as a difference between a toolbox and a tool belt. Power through is in your tool belt. You use it all the time. You activate power in other people. Occasionally, you have to go back to the toolbox and you have to pull out power over, because sometimes you do need to exercise power in order to make sure the organization stays healthy and so forth. And so that's the way we think about it, that the dominant way power is exercised, the dynamics of power and leading through are power through other people.
As you were describing that, I was thinking of a quote from James Stockwell, who was later admiral, but served, sadly, was sentenced to 7 years in the Hanoi Hilton as a prisoner of war in North Vietnam during the war. And he wrote extensively after the war but he talked about leadership, and he said, leaders gain power by giving it away. And I think that's what you are exploring or explaining. Is that correct?
That's correct. In fact, the converse is also true, by the way. People who exercise power over people actually lose power, because the people, they have formal power, but the people who are being powered over, those people don't trust them. They don't give their full effort. They do the minimum required. And so they actually they lose power. It's a fact of life in organizations that most organizations who have power over do not get the full potential of their people.
I would say that's the old compliance versus commitment. So I'll comply because I have a hammer over my head, but I'm not really committed.
That's right. That's right.
Now you have an interesting concept called visible information. Can you explain that?
Yeah, this is really crucial to solving this dilemma between unity and freedom of action. The idea behind visible information is that there are certain kinds of information in an organization that an individual team that's taking initiative needs to know in order to tailor what they do in a way that fits with the organization. So these are things like the organization's objectives, its values, its principles, its strategy, it's the context in which all this takes place. If you have that kind of information, so that effectively people throughout the organization know as much about what the organization's doing as the CEO, and they therefore can tailor their work to make it fit. Visible information, however, is not just about making it accessible. People not only have to know the information, they have to understand it, they have to value it, and they have to learn how to use it. And then that's what leaders do. So leaders aren't telling people what to do. They're giving people a framework of visible information and then training them to see it. So they really can see it and know how to use it. And when that happens, then they can take initiative within their project in a way that connects with everybody else.
As you were saying this, I was thinking about some other things, this idea of information, and especially in organizational change and things like that. And so often such initiatives don't always succeed. But one of the reasons is that information is shared, but that's it. And you mentioned an operative word is understand.
Right.
How, as a leader, can I help my people understand where we're going and why?
So you have a strategy, you understand what you're doing, but most people in a power over world, they embody that strategy in 100 PowerPoint slides. And you have to help people understand what the strategy is and really understand it. So that means they have to be trained. You have to educate people. You have to share it with them. And there has to be a kind of a common shared understanding. This is who we are. This is how we compete. This is what's important to us. These are our priorities. And those are not hard to define. You can simplify them easily. Most people make it complicated so they can hold power, because they view information as a source of power in the power over world. But in leading through, information needs to be visible to everybody, and that empowers them to take initiative, so you get more innovation, more good leadership work being done.
Right. And as you were saying it, and this sharing of it, but this is real work. It's not something like, here's where we need to go, let's go there. But you got to keep on that message. Is that something you share with those you work with?
Totally. Yeah. It's an ongoing process. It's not an event. It's something that's just happens regularly. And, people learn how to do it. Now the technologies allow us to make that just super easy to do. If you're willing to share that information, help people understand it, it's not as hard as it used to be to make it visible to people so they know and understand it.
Okay. Now, we've been talking a lot of theory, but you've made it clear that even I can understand it. But the heart of part of what makes your book compelling is the stories. And you have a story in there about Dr. Toby Cosgrove, who's the CEO of the Cleveland Clinic. And what was this? Why did you profile him, and what's the message as it relates to your book from there, Professor?
Great question. So we put this example in there as an example of creating what we call a modular leadership system. So let me explain it to you. Cosgrove was CEO of Cleveland Clinic for a short time. He was a very eminent surgeon. He was at a class at the Harvard Business School speaking. Student raised her hand and said, "When are you going to help your doctors develop empathy?" And he was like, "What?" And she explained that her dad was a cardiologist and he needed heart surgery, and he investigated, and he knew that the Cleveland Clinic had superior medical outcomes than the Mayo Clinic. But he chose to go to Mayo because they were nicer. It was a friendlier place. And she asked him a question. In his own words, he said, "I was floored. I was stunned." He went back, began thinking, and realized that what she had said was true. And so he embarked on an initiative they called empathy. And the idea was simply, everybody in this organization is a caregiver. Everybody needs to learn how to put themselves in the patient's shoes and do everything they can to make the patients stay in that hospital a good experience. But they also had to change some things. And one of the things they did was absolutely stunning. They moved from a discipline-based organization. So if you're a cardiology, there's the cardiology department, and so forth. And they moved to a more disease state organization. And they moved people together. They actually changed buildings. It was a big effort. And they created what they called institutes that were organized around parts of the body and disease states. So cardiologists were in there with surgeons, with internists, and a bunch of other people around heart health, nutritionists, all sorts of people. And as a result, they tried hard to get rid of this problem in hospitals where patients kept seeing individual doctors who never talked to each other. And it was just frustrating for the patient and frustrating for their care. And they tried to change that so it's teams. That was a key idea. It's teams of people working together to really deliver the best care we can. And then there were many, many other examples. They went through a big training program. They treated everybody as caregivers. They made videos about empathy. They're absolutely stunning. They're still up there on YouTube, have millions of views, and helped people understand we can be empathetic and we can still deliver outstanding medical outcomes.
That's great. Now I want to throw a curveball at you. So, because you have been at leadership positions as dean in the Harvard Business School and then presidency of BYU Idaho. So, how does this book relate to the work that you've done? Do you wish you would have known this before, or how does it play out?
Of course. Of course I do.
Okay. Well, next question.
So, it's interesting. Many of the ideas in the book started many, many years ago, a long, long time ago, back in the late 70s and even in the early 80s and onward, as I experienced through research and teaching, but also being in the field, being in companies, observing leaders, seeing things in action that were absolutely stunning to me. And I started developing ideas about leadership a long time ago. And so some of those ideas I had in my mind and heart, and I put them into practice in my leadership, but then I learned a lot as well. And subsequently, over the years, I kept acquiring more insight. And then my children, two of my children, my daughter Erin and my son Jonathan, both moved into this arena, both as leaders themselves, but also studying it, teaching about it, consulting about it. And so we decided to get together. And I'll tell you, the book took 6 years to write. And it was because we needed to hone the ideas and really formulate them in a way that could be really understandable to people. And it's much harder to write a concise statement of what we really believe than to write a book that's 500 pages long. And so that took the time, but it was a compilation of our experience, our research, our teaching, and then working together, we got new ideas through that process. So it was a wonderful experience.
Okay. So I've never asked an author this. What was it like working with your daughter and your son on a book? Because you're the expert, as they were too. But how does that work?
It was really fascinating. My children are very, very capable. It's amazing to me. I mean, I knew them when they were growing up. And I'm sitting there in meetings and they're saying things and I'm saying to myself, wow, that's really insightful. Wow, that is interesting. And then they would ask a question. I said, whoa, that's a really good question. And I'd sit back and just marvel. And it was a fantastic experience. We didn't always agree and we had to work on stuff. But it was a great, great experience.
That's wonderful. I love the humanity of this. So, as you know, we're racing through this, and I want to bring the program to a good close. And as you know, I ask every person I interview a story about grace. Do you have one you would like to share with us, Kim Clark?
Sure. John, I could fill your program for days with stories about grace in my life. Here's one. Huge impact on my life. I'm sitting in Memorial Hall at Harvard University in my first semester as a graduate student in economics. I'm in an exam. It's a 4-hour exam. I have a course given by a very, very famous professor named John Dunlop. And I am ready, and I open up the exam book, and there's just one word. It's a 1-word exam, and it says critique. And he gave us 2 published papers, academic papers, and he just said critique. I had to critique these 2 papers. Oh, my heart sank, because this is like the worst thing to ask me. For me, it takes me time to kind of work through things. All right, so now I had prepared. I mean, I'd studied. I'd even prayed about this because this was a really important exam. So I opened up the first one and I started reading it. And within a few minutes, I knew exactly what to write. I never made an outline, John. I never did. I just picked up the little pen and pencil, started writing. This is before computers, by the way.
Okay.
And I'm writing and writing and writing. I wrote for an hour. I'm done. Open up the next paper, exactly the same thing happened. Write and write and write and write. And I got done and I knew I could not do that without a lot of divine help. It was pure grace. Pure grace. And it turned out that Dunlop read those exams, and that's kind of probably what he thought too, although he didn't attribute it to divine grace. He called me up and wanted me to work for him, and I ended up in Washington with him when he was Secretary of Labor. He helped me put my dissertation together. He became a professor at Harvard Business School. He was a university professor. He'd go anywhere he wanted. He went to the business school. He was instrumental in getting me interviews there. I got hired there. I became the dean, and there you go.
What a great story. Wow. I've heard lots of stories of grace, but never on an exam. But how appropriate, because that's your original career as a professor.
Yeah, a huge impact. Huge
That's
impact.
great. That's great. How can people find you, Dr. Clark? So,
I'm on LinkedIn.
Okay.
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm at BYU. I'm pretty easy to find.
Great. The name of the book is Leading Through, Activating the Soul, the Heart, and the Mind of Leadership. And I know it's available wherever fine books are sold, and of course on Amazon. So,
Absolutely.
Kim Clark, it has been such a pleasure to have you on the show today. And with that, we will go out.